With Western countries scrambling to solidify their influence on the African continent, has the landscape become their tool to push their agenda? Well, political activist Phillip Dexter, who is with the Pan-African for Socialism, is convinced this is the case. He joins us now to discuss an opinion piece that he penned titled "Drunk on Power, the Neoliberal Capture of the South African Mediascape" by the U.S. State Department. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning, Mr. Dexter. So you point out in your article that the South African mediascape has become captured by a coalition of right-wing and neoliberal forces, with key online publications like News24, Amapongane and Daily Maverick all firmly under neoliberal control. What brought you to this conclusion?
Well, I think if one looks at the publishing record of these journals and newspapers, they're fundamentally focused on two things. One is on bringing down the ANC as a government and ensuring that, it gets below 50% in the next election. And secondly, attacking socialist and left formations. I mean, we've seen the brutal attacks on NUMSA, for example, trying to overthrow the current leadership of the trade union. And I think all of these organizations have a history of meddling in the politics of other organizations. And if one looks at their funding, although there are fronts to that funding, once you trace back as to where the funding comes from, it's usually things like the Soros Foundation and the U.S. State Department through the National Endowment for Democracy and so on. So, and this is nothing new, by the way. I mean, the U.S. has been meddling in African politics for decades, starting with the assassinations of Patrice Lumumba, Tongakare, Sankara, even our own Chris Hani. They were involved in informing the South African government as to the whereabouts of Nelson Mandela, leading to his arrest. So, myself and Roscoe Palm, who worked on the article, have also done a lot of background research, and we will be soon releasing some of the actual data that shows where this funding comes from and how it's utilized.
I'd like for us to expand on the issue of funding and these alleged sinister operations that happen in the background. But maybe let's just pick up on a point you mentioned, right, that these organizations want to bring down the ANC to below 50% in the next election. The brutal attacks on NUMSA, as you point out. Where's the lie in the reporting when we look at the case of the African National Congress service delivery issues on the ground? The police minister scrambling almost every weekend to allay fears of the communities. Another Imbizo being hosted this weekend. On the part of NUMSA, their own members taking them to court, where they funded to, act against the high echelons of the party. A lot of money spent on that conference, and some members pointing out that shouldn't have been done. So where's the lie in the reporting?
Well, the lie, in the case of the ANC, it's simple. The line in these publications is ANC and black equals corrupt. They never ever report on DA corruption, DA service delivery failures. They never report on corruption in corporates in South Africa. Their focus is on the ANC government and the ANC government alone. And I'm not saying that the ANC doesn't deserve criticism, but it's just that the line is consistent about the ANC is corrupt, black people in business are corrupt. In the case of NUMSA, similarly, they criticize the General Secretary of NUMSA, but they don't criticize other people. So they actually take sides in these disputes. So it's not objective reporting. I mean, in the case of Newframe, for example, the closure of Newframe, Amapongane concocted a complete lie about Chinese government funding, using xenophobia, and then accusing a Jamaican-born Indian of being the sort of Machiavellian hand behind all the issues of funding there, while never once admitting that they get funding from particular sources. So it's this claim to impartiality and their involvement and meddling in politics in a biased way. If they want to do that, that's fine, but they must just stop pretending to be an impartial or professional media. What they are is a mouthpiece for particular political interests, and that is the right wing in South Africa, neoliberals, and the global agenda against the South. Then that's our argument, and it's very simple.
You mentioned the new frame, and in your opinion piece, you speak of on the rocks, off the record. What is that?
Well, you know, the editor of New Frame, a few months after they opened up the publication, was paid a surprise visit by the then U.S. ambassador with 3 or 4 of her underlings in tow. Knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, wanted to come in. He spoke to them at the doorway. She openly, announced that she ran these briefings with editors and the media in South Africa, invited him for drinks at a venue in the Western Cape, which I know very well, and said that they had these sessions monthly to brief the media. They called it on the rocks and off the record. The question we're asking all these publications is, did you attend those briefings? And if you did, what was said there? And why are those things not reported in the media? Because if you're going for secret briefings with the U.S. State Department, who's promising you funding, promising you promotions and jobs, and by the way, if you look at that, there's a revolving door. Many of the people who work at these publications now work for U.S.-based funded think tanks. And again, we'll be releasing the names of those people shortly.
You also ask why such an agenda exists, and you go on to say, manufacturing a reality through controlling the narrative in the media is an essential weapon of imperialism.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, again, nothing new. If one goes back through the 1960s, in the Vietnam War, if you look at the whole period of anti-colonial struggles, the West, and in particular the US, and to some extent the UK, funded various organizations to try and either sway people's opinion against socialism or communist parties, and to manufacture an agenda that democracy and the free market are the only way that people can achieve any kind of development in their country. It now today manifests itself in this anti-China and anti-Russia propaganda. And again, I'm not taking sides in something like the Ukraine war, but the reality is the US and NATO surrounded Russia with nuclear weapons and then expected Russia to sit idly by. I always use the example that if Russia was to put nuclear weapons in Mexico, the Americans would bomb them back into the Stone Age. But yet the way it's presented is as if, Vladimir Putin is some crazy dictator, or Xi Jinping, is involved in attempting to colonize Africa, when the reality is quite the opposite. The people who've plundered and colonized Africa for hundreds of years, for centuries, are the West, the Europeans and lately the Americans. And that, by the way, that has been brutal. They've invaded countries, bombed us, assassinated our leaders. Whatever the Chinese are doing in Africa, they're certainly not doing that.
You speak of the end result of this alleged program, and you say they want to replace the ANC. But as is the habit of US-backed regime change operations, have spared no thought for the long-term consequences of such a coup, you call it. If they want to replace the ANC, if we follow your line of thinking, then who would be the replacement that would then advance the agenda as you have outlined?
Well, I don't know who would ultimately, but I mean, there are various opposition parties who are pro-American, pro-the West, who are all waiting in the wings, to seize power. When I talk about the long-term consequences, what I mean is if you look at every country where they backed a coup, a soft power coup, or a regime change agenda, Libya, Iraq, all of these places, and even Ukraine today, it results in war. It results in poverty, misery for people. What we are saying is that you stay out of our politics, stop meddling in our country, leave us to determine our own future, and ask South Africans to be patriots and stop doing the dirty work of imperialists.
And just to note that we reached out to News 24's Adrian Basson and Dr. Vashna Jagannath at the time of this interview. We're yet to receive, confirmation or a message from Dr. Jagannath, but we did get a response from Mr. Basson, and he says Mr. Dexter's spurious, fantastical claims are laughable at best. News 24 will not respond to it. You speak of more body of evidence that you are putting together, and you will not be changing your stance on calling for media houses to reveal their donors.
Absolutely. Look, they demand of the ANC, of government, of those of us in politics that we must reveal our sources of funding. They demand transparency on what we are paid for salaries, etc., etc. Why is it that they think they're exempt? Why is it that they claim that they're not subject to being manipulated by financial interests and powerful elements in other societies? I'm happy to disclose where I get my salary from. I'm happy to disclose who the funders are of organizations I work for. But what I'm saying is that it's trite for them to talk about fantastical claims, spurious claims, blah, blah, blah. But they haven't answered the question. Did they attend the briefings with the State Departments? Yes or no? Do they get funding from the Open Society Foundation? Do they get funding that comes from the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy through whatever front organizations that exist in South Africa and the rest of the world? Those are the fundamental questions, and the fact that they won't answer them shows that they have something to hide.
Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. Phillip Dexter is a political activist, and just a note to our viewers that we did indeed try to get hold of a number of publications that Mr. Dexter believes have been captured by a coalition of right-wing and neoliberal forces. Unfortunately, only one managed to get back to Newzroom Afrika.